So, the game that everyone pointed and laughed at launch is finally here. I mean back, or has bought some of those glasses with the funny nose attached. Either way, New World is no more, and New World Aeternum has risen in its place. But for a game with a well-known rocky past, is it any good? I have done a lot of new worlding over this last 3 or 4 weeks, so let me tell you a bit about that experience. I hadn't paid too much attention to the planned revamp of New World. It had sort of drifted past me, but I was not particularly bothered as I have in the past tried on a number of occasions to get into New World, and I always sort of bounced off it. I think I purchased it originally when it was reduced on Steam to about 20 quid, probably in like the first time it was on sale. I saw all the video titles on YouTube either singing its demise or lamenting its failure, but I decided that I wasn't going to go in at launch as I was too busy doing something else. But when it was reduced around a time when I didn't have anything on, I snapped it up and I got involved. There was a new Fresh Start server at that time, so there was some life around me when I first ventured onto the island. Now I will say that from the start I did kind of like the more simplified style of combat akin to an action RPG rather than dancing through rotations and cooldowns. It was refreshing, but it just didn't really perform well and was buggy as shit, and whilst the combat was fun, the enemy diversity was a bit underwhelming and the environment, whilst quite pretty in places, just felt a bit sort of lifeless. I think I got to about level 20 or so and then just binned it off and then uninstalled it. Some time passed, maybe a year, and for some reason I installed it again. I'm not sure why, maybe I was bored, and with hope in my heart I reinstalled it, began running about, and then somehow clipped into a big stone and just fucked it right off after 10 minutes. The second uninstall. Then, recently, chatter started to swirl around chat channels at work and on the internet in general that come October, New World would be reborn. So I started doing a bit of reading on the subject and got a sense of what to expect. Sure, it wasn't going to be as ambitious as Final Fantasy XIV, but it seemed sizable, and bringing in console players and revamping the story made me hope that perhaps this would now be the game that I could sort of see when I first played it. So, with the knowledge that Aeternum was coming, I hit that install button again to try and grind it out a bit to refresh my memory of the pre-Aeternum experience before we entered the New World. Once again, I am reminded that despite the bugs, the game did look beautiful and the combat was still enjoyable. It definitely played better than before, so I just ploughed on through the main story quest and found myself oscillating from thinking I'm quite enjoying this to how can this shit still be in the game. To that point, one major frustration in my pre-Aeternum gaming was arriving at the Heartforged Champion's lair and being blocked from progressing because A, my character got stuck in a sort of eternal falling state and clipped through the floor endlessly, and B, the Heartforged twat just followed me around doing nothing, taking no damage, standing in front of me and just making a weird sound. Eventually, after going off and doing some side quests numerous times and coming back and trying the quest every now and then, I went back one final time, and as I entered, my character spazzed out, fell through the floor and just sort of bumped about endlessly, and I just threw my hands up in the air, went for a piss, made a drink and just left it running. When I actually came back to my computer, for some reason, my character had magically got a footing, the Heartful Champion had just fucking disappeared, and I was able to interact with the altar, and somehow that just completed the quest and I was able to continue. I mean, how do you get 3 years in and still have a major bug in a key part of the MSQ? Like, where the fuck are your QA team? I don't know anything about the internal setup of the development studio, and big game companies are awful in many of their practices, so I'm inclined to take the side of individual workers rather than the corporation, and so I'm not going to place blame on the workers themselves, but it is still baffling to me that shit hadn't been fixed in all this time. Perhaps it doesn't happen for everyone, but that was my experience and it was kind of ridiculous. Anyway, that particular event aside, and even though I was progressing through the game and not hating it, I still had a bit of a list of moans about the game that I was reminded of in its pre-Aeternum state, and I will now list them. I think one of my main gripes is the rappel system. Is that the correct word? Hold on. Okay, maybe it's not the proper term, but the system that allows you to sort of just run over objects or up walls without having to press a button. Sure, I bet that seemed like a great idea at the time, until I have to fight someone on a fucking staircase and my guy keeps climbing up and down like an idiot over the banister. Or I stop to speak to a quest giver and my guy just runs off the end of the pier or whatever as he tries to jump an imaginary wall. Obviously, I understand that all of these are based on my experience and your mileage may vary or whatever, but this one, while sort of small, drove me up the fucking wall. Pun intended. Also, the UI, whilst on the face of it looked quite pretty and functional, had some inadequacies. One of them for me being having the equip button and the salvage button next to each other and seemingly no warning before committing to salvage. Perhaps for higher level gear, but either which way. Yes, you can lock important gear so it won't be salvaged by accident, and yes, I must take some responsibility for that happening, but it still didn't feel good. So perhaps they should be located away from each other. Never mind, it's too late now. The damage is done. It also felt like a real slog getting from level 40 to 50. I think some of this may have been because my ADHD brain needing to try all the weapons and not being able to settle on which weapon set I liked the most or found the most effective. But I found that progress ground to a bit of a halt on the main quest, where you start to make your way to fighting Captain What's-His-Face. You really need to stick with one weapon set and pump as much into the stats in order to make the most of all the weapon perks and skills you unlock. I think had I have had more points in perks at around 50, I may not have hit that wall, but in general it did feel very grindy and a bit of a chore. So what I'm saying is that there were certainly some inadequacies in my gameplay, but I was just playing the game without thinking about it to have a good time, and it really didn't feel that good in terms of leveling. I also thought that at this point it may have been a bit of a mistake to have played a week solid of New World before the launch of Aeternum. Anyway. Another criticism which I think many people have and has been there at the beginning of the game's original release was the choice to start you with the sword and shield rather than letting you choose your own weapon set from the start. It was never a good idea and just sort of wasted some of your time before you got what you wanted, unless you wanted the sword and shield of course. I think they addressed this a little later in patches, as when I started a new character in the run-up to Aeternum, I did find a lot of other weapons just lying around the starting area that you could equip. I don't know if they did insert these and I never noticed them before, but they are there, albeit not very well signposted. I mean, if this was to combat the fact that you didn't start with them, like why not just make it so that you do get the choice? Anyway. Another irritant was weapon and armour durability. It was a bit annoying having to keep repairing shit, and on a few occasions I literally ran out of money in mats and couldn't do fuck all. Again, I guess you have to be prepared and own your own shit, but it is just another system getting in the way of me enjoying the game. And what is undeniably good about the game is running around stabbing the shit out of things. And lastly, I alluded to the look of the game. Whilst it is quite pretty, it is also a little bit boring in a way. I don't really know how to explain this one, but I often felt like they went for a bit more realism rather than stylized. Like, I think I want a bit more fantastical, a bit more unreal to really make it feel like I am playing an mmorpg. It feels to me that New World was always a little confused and having a bit of an identity crisis. The press releases and general blurb about the game would seem to suggest more of a survival/sandbox type game, but it always felt like it was flirting with being more of the theme park MMO. It had a story, but it kind of suffered owing to it sort of being two things at once and therefore perhaps diluting both elements. Just my opinion, obviously, and I am more partial to a theme park, but it felt like it needed to find itself and sort of pick a side. And then it did. And so here we are. The caterpillar spun its cocoon and emerged as a beautiful caterpillar. Okay, so I jest a little because, do you know what? They did it. They bloody went and did it. They actually made it good. No, I mean it. I started again. The new player experience is better. The intro sequences have better camera angles. They're just more dynamic. It's more engaging. You get to select your archetype from the beginning and your weapons. And when you do select, each one actually looks kind of different and has some kind of style and individuality, like a bit of character to them. It's a good start. Then you start the game in earnest and it is much more colourful, and you know what? You can fucking swim. This is much better, much more fantastical. And then when you get to the beach, it seems that they have cluttered up the place with plants and corals, and it is obviously the same, but it just feels a bit more rich, a bit more boosty. Now all of your interactions with quest givers are voiced and acted, as it were, and the NPCs are a bit goofy. A friend of mine who's been playing said it gave him sort of Fable vibes, and I can see that in the character design. Whether they were always goofy and you just couldn't fucking see it, and now you're seeing them up close, or this is a new thing, doesn't matter. I think it definitely feels better. And what it definitely is cheesy as fuck. And do you know what? That cheesiness really gave me the MMORPG feels. Like I was playing a proper MMORPG, as I would describe it. Sort of like it needs to be a bit shit to feel right. Lovely stuff.
It really is.
But not only is the presentation jazzed up, but the actual gameplay experience is better as well. I just went balls to the wall on the MSQ, and as I did, I found that the gear that was dropping and what I was being rewarded from quests was better and more useful to me. Levels and weapon levels rolled in at a good pace. The UI had improved, weapon durability was in the bin, no longer did my character keep climbing up and down shit and jumping off ledges unprompted. Even just very small changes like slightly increasing the size of some of the enemies added something and took away that boring feeling of just smacking about endless human-sized baddies. Remember, I had played the old version for a week before this, so that was fresh in my memory, and I had also pointed out that it felt like a slog and a chore. Well, now I just rolled from one quest to another, enjoying the flow and feel, and I'm being completely honest, I was having a good time. I was really enjoying it on its merits. In the space of a week and a bit of playing probably 4 to 6 hours a day, I had reached level 63 and completed the base game MSQ. There was very little friction during that time apart from some very minor bugs and one more significant bug which may not have even been a bug, more of a balancing issue, but essentially at one point in the game a certain type of enemy I had to kill 6 of wasn't spawning. I went back the next day and found that they were actually spawning but in certain places and in such low numbers, and there were so many other players around that getting the kills became very difficult and took quite a long time. But apart from that hiccup, everything worked, even the Heartforged champion. I think they even jazzed up all the armour and clothing. I certainly found some mad fucking helmets. Now, they have definitely improved the elements that I said, which was the main contributing factor to my enjoyment, but I think it's only fair that I point out that there were some other elements that probably had a part to play in making my progression easier in the game. So number 1, the introduction of console players has obviously boosted the player count massively from what it is, and the Fresh Start servers have boosted the Steam player count as well, as they usually tend to do. Numbers seem to have been bobbing along at around 7k daily, and now we seem to be up to about 50k just on Steam. But there is a very slight gradual decline, which I guess should be expected, but it seems that we're still above 45k. If you add to that the console numbers, which I don't know, but judging by the amount of PlayStation and Xbox logos in the chat, probably not to be sniffed at, there is now a healthy player base. This in turn means that quests are often easier and quicker to complete because you can get in on someone else's kills and help other people out, and everyone benefits. Also, if it is your thing, there are more players for expeditions, the game's version of dungeons, and PvP matchmaking. So this definitely greases the wheels of progress. Now number 2, I came into this with a prior knowledge of the prior week. I had a plan, I had tested weapon combos and settled on the build that I wanted, which meant I knew what I was doing, and also I just pushed all the progress into the sword and shield for my tank build. Which then meant that by the time I got up to the higher levels, I had the perks to match, so I was able to just fly through the MSQ. So these things definitely added to my experience. Perhaps another reason I enjoyed my time is that apart from one small glance at the web to see what was the better gems I should equip to my gear to provide more tanky perks, I just went my own way. Like a stubborn little dick, I just spent all my points on strength and constitution. Which kinda sounds like a fascist slogan, but not when I am driving the big red bus, comrades. I then slapped a gem on to taunt and bought a shit ton of onyx to increase my damage absorption, and Thunderguff gusted his way through the world without a care. In fact, my obsession with making myself super tanky meant that I never really had any issues with any of the bosses, so I don't know if this is a balancing issue and they have just been made too easy to help you get through to max level and endgame, or I made a fucking unit who could just soak fat damage and slowly jab away at the enemy with his little sword. I did shit damage, but I could take a fireball to the face no problem. Something to think about, and if you played other builds, let me know what your experience was with bosses in the comments. I'm genuinely interested to know. I've already mentioned it a couple of times, both pre and post Aeternum, but I'm going to say it again because sometimes this game looks absolutely stunning. The mists and the shafts of light are perhaps some of the best I have ever seen, especially now all the saturation has been turned up a few notches. It is actually a pleasant place to run about in. And while we're talking about aesthetics, the revamping of New World has in some spaces revamped the argument towards New World's themes of colonialism. I was watching a video the other day and a guy was talking about how people were coming into his chat and talking about the game is bad because of the colonial themes. And he was just saying how he just can't see it. I think that if you can't recognise that this game does sort of wear the aesthetic of Spanish colonialism, you're being a little bit disingenuous, and in addition to that, the title New World is and has always been a little unfortunate, given that that is what many European explorers referred to the uncharted territories of the Americas. So there are clear connections to that theme, but even I, as Captain Wokey Woke, would say it is only in the shallowest sense. You are not displacing people and committing atrocities within the game. It is purely just a style choice rather than full-throated endorsement of colonialism. So there is a bit of a connection, but it's not really what the game is about. As for the story, I did just skip every bit of text, but the cutscenes meant that I got enough to sort of know what was going on, which was enough for me. The traditional MMORPG experience, I guess. But having said that, it's probably interested me enough that I will now go away and perhaps watch some lore videos on YouTube, so it piqued my interest to a degree. I've done a few expeditions and I found it a bit of a sweaty experience with people immediately running off all over the place. If you watched my Warcraft video, you'll know that I have thoughts on how dungeons should be introduced to new players, but you can watch that to hear my ideal scenario. Anyway, they were quite enjoyable, and as I actually have a couple of pals playing the game for a change, I'll probably look to have a go at more of those where we can run them on our own and take our time. And with PvP, whilst it was enjoyable and your gear scales so that you can take part, I do wonder how important getting the right gear with the right perks will be to playing it at max level, and to be honest, I don't know if I'm up for that journey. I'm just going to drop a couple of niggles before I give my final thoughts on the game. And to be honest, while there has been a lot of changes for the better, it is still really just the same game. It is way more playable now, but like much of the PC player base have been saying, this game is 3 years old. It's not new, it's not just been released. And this is not a Realm Reborn. It's good, but it is just a revamp. Which kind of makes me ask the question, why couldn't you have done this ages ago? I don't know what prompted this decision, and must have taken some time to make all those story changes and cutscenes and stuff, but is this just too little, too late? That sounds dramatic, and I don't think that this game is doomed, but perhaps too much water has flowed under the bridge for it to turn its fortunes around as much as, say, FF14. I still think the enemy diversity is a bit limited, but it didn't really hamper my enjoyment too much. But you are fighting a lot of the same thing a lot of the time, until maybe some of the later levels, but still, it's still pretty formulaic. While my previous point is true for much of the game, to be fair as I possibly can be, the latest expansion's content in the Elysian Wilds does actually have a much better enemy diversity, so things were already moving in the right direction. Oh, and I would be remiss in my duties of being a filthy pinko scumbag if I didn't point out the monetization. There is a cash shop and a battle pass, all par for the course really, but perhaps the scummiest monetization technique in play here is that they have removed the ability recently to earn transmog tokens from elite chests within the game, but you can buy them from the cash shop. Yeah, that ain't nice. Which perhaps wouldn't be as bad for the fact that they used to be available and then, as I said, Amazon recently changed it. Cheers, Jeff. And as the fashion game is often one of the end game pastimes of many MMORPGs, I feel like that was a bit of a bad decision. Perhaps the game will be relatively successful, and I think they should be happy with the fact that they now have a genuinely good game. But there will always be a stink on it. There are a lot of players posting dead game in the global chat, and it will be interesting to see where the numbers end up being after the honeymoon period has passed, so we'll see. There was also a lot of people posting about femboys in the chat, so perhaps the femboys will lift New World into glory. Oh, and some guy was moaning about Arabs in Germany. Classic general chat stuff. Fuck that guy. Ultimately, having got close to max level, I will likely finish that journey and then put this game down for a while. I have rinsed the fuck out of it and I need a break, both pre and post launch of Aeternum. But it is a sign of my opinion of the game that I shall keep it installed and will be popping in and out to play some PvP or expeditions or trials, and if I am willing to let you sit on my hard drive taking up valuable space, then that has to be some kind of endorsement. A lot of people have been saying that New World has no endgame, and after watching a few videos on it, there are plenty of bits that I could slowly grind for, on and off, owing to the fact that I don't have any real desire to compete with anyone. But unlike the bitches that moan that they have consumed all the content and now all the pudding is gone, I shall just move on to another game. But I will, like I do with other MMORPGs I like, come back whenever a new expansion is released, so it has gained that level of status alongside WoW and Guild Wars 2. For doing a quick Google around and having a look at reviews after I finished writing this script, it seems like most people are really enjoying it. There are some criticisms and I have heard about some performance issues and crashing on PS5, but otherwise it's fairly positive. It certainly has performed a lot better for me, but maybe that experience that I had at first of all was so bad that anything was up from there. I would definitely recommend this game as an action RPG alongside being an MMORPG. It could even prove a bit of a gateway into other MMOs for players who haven't previously dipped their toe into the MMORPG pool. Well worth the money even if you play it for 2 weeks, complete all the main story and then just put it down and pick it up now and then. For returning players, it is now the game that it promised to be on launch, and for dedicated New World heads who have been here from the start, yeah, I get it, that must smart, but it has been improved, so at least there is that. I think it's inarguable that if you're playing it on PC, the game plays better now, so I suppose that's a small silver lining, if you will. Either way, recommended. If you had it previously, reinstall it and play it. If you haven't and you see it and you've got the money for it, have a go. I think you'll be quietly impressed. Has it got the legs or for longevity? I don't really know. I imagine it's going to calm down, only time will tell, but it's genuinely an improvement. Thanks for watching. I'm off to chop some wood.